Now all of you know that this large bone, this long bone in the upper arm is known as the humerus. The humerus has, as I mentioned when we were just talking about or introducing the bone, has a couple of key landmarks on it or processes. And you'll remember hopefully that a process is something that sticks out and muscles attached to it. So let's look at a couple of the key processes on the humerus. First of all, we have the head, and it's easily identified because like your own head, it's round. And this is covered in articular cartilage, and it's a kind of cartilage that's very slippery. And when it forms the joint with the glenohumeral joint, which the fossa here is also covered with articular cartilage, it becomes a very slippery joint, a synovial joint, and we'll talk about those later. So we have the head covered in articular cartilage. Then over here, this large bump at the superior aspect very close to the top of the humerus is called the greater, meaning bigger, of course, tubercle. It's an attachment site for 3 of the 4 rotator cuff muscles. And then there's a smaller one right here called the lesser tubercle, a little bit smaller, lesser. I'm going to turn this humerus on end, and you can notice there is a groove between, there's a tendon actually from biceps brachii that passes through here, the long head, between the greater tubercle and the lesser tubercle. So again, with the head, greater and lesser tubercle. This is called the neck of the humerus. That would make sense, head and neck. Coming down the shaft of the humerus, there's a roughened area over here. This is known as the deltoid tuberosity, and that's an area where the deltoid muscle attaches to. Then we see these very prominent bumps that stick out. One on the medial side called the medial epicondyle, epi meaning to the outside, epicondyle. And then here is the lateral epicondyle. And you can palpate, which means to feel, these on yourself. The medial epicondyle, quite easy to feel. This is the area of your funny bone. And then the lateral epicondyle, a little bit less obvious, but it is also sticks out quite a bit. And these are the attachment sites, the lateral epicondyle for your wrist extensors, and then the medial epicondyle for your wrist and finger flexors. So that's the medial and lateral epicondyle of the humerus. So again, greater tubercle, lesser tubercle, head, neck. On the lateral surface, there's the deltoid tuberosity. It doesn't show up that easily. It's quite smooth. Medial epicondyle and lateral epicondyle. We can also see that there are some rounded parts which form the parts of the articulation or joints for the radius and the ulna to ride upon. And like the head of the humerus, they're covered in articular cartilage as well. Moving down to the radius, we can see here at the radius, the head of the radius is quite rounded. This allows in pronation and supination, pronation crossing over, supination, palm up, this to roll quite nicely. It's a really quite a slick design. So that's the head of the radius. You can also see here this large bump just distal to the head of the radius. This is the insertion for biceps brachii called the radial tuberosity. Radial tuberosity. As we move down the radius, as I've shown you before, it flares out. And there's a really sharp piece here called the styloid process. Styloid process. Staying down here, I'm going to show you the styloid process on the ulna. The ulna is quite thin down at this end, but notice, unlike the radius, it gets thicker as we kind of move proximally. The back of the ulna, which is the pointy part of your elbow, this is known as the Electron Process, and you've probably banged that before. And at the back of the humerus, which I didn't show you earlier, this is called the Electron Fossa, fossa being a dish. Electron Process and extension locks into the Electron Fossa. Those are the main bony landmarks of the humerus, the radius, and the ulna.